And we're on, and welcome to another edition of the Mad Tech webcast. Thank you all for tuning in for our weekly or bi-weekly, depends on who's available, look at sort of deep dive subjects in ad tech and mad tech. And today we've got Nate Woodman. Nate has been a long-time friend of ExchangeWire. He's appeared in many of our panels. He's worked with many of the biggest agencies and ad tech companies in the space, and we have him today here to talk about our key subject, which basically is talking about brands, how they can work with identity in the privacy first world. Nate, welcome to the Mad Tech webcast.
Thanks, Kieran.
How are things in Boston?
Things are well. We had, well, I mean, despite everything, but it was like everybody's in quarantine. We're on our little compound up here. It is Boston, so it actually did snow a little bit this morning. So
okay, awesome. So let's jump straight into it, right? So brands are facing probably one of the biggest sort of biggest crisis / problems they have ever faced in the digital ecosystem, between browsers clamping down on third-party cookie use and privacy legislation and use of data. This has created its own problems in terms of targeting, attribution, measurement. And these are huge problems for big brands who spend hundreds of millions of dollars on digital advertising every year, particularly display. So, I mean, there's been a lot of talk about it, a lot of column inches written about it, a lot of webcasts, a lot of podcasts, a lot of whiteboard sessions. But let's talk about the solutions that are on the market at the minute. Now, one of the things I wanted to talk about in depth was about the concept of clean rooms, which seems to be technology du jour right now. And there seems to be a lot of interesting plays around it, particularly Google obviously made a massive play with the ADH, which is the Ads Data Hub solution that they've rolled out. Have been used in Europe for quite a long time, and now only brought to the US, and seems to be big news. So let's talk about that concept first, Nate. And what do you, maybe you can give us some insight into how brands are using these clean rooms and what they're being used for.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the clean rooms, the clean room concept was a mechanism or necessity to create some level of privacy protection, for the relationship between the data owner, in the case Google, and their customers, right? But what it allows is it allows a brand to push their data, and we're going to talk about Google specifically, and then we'll broaden.
Yeah.
It allows a brand to push their data into ADH, right, for the purposes of targeting, right, for the purposes of buying ads. But when they want to get information back, right, they don't get the information in the same manner that they pushed it in. Right. They so you have a brand can push in maybe an email address or an identity, some type something about identity into ADH for targeting. Now, if they want to see whether or not that specific user was exposed to an ad, as an example, they can't. Right. That's where there's a level of abstraction that ADH brings in. So instead of, but you can still get some information out. So as an example, if a brand pushed in, say, 1,000 different users, right, and they knew that, and they labeled those users, say, into a cohort or into a segment, you can push those users in, and then you can query in ADH and say, hey, there was 1,000, that cohort that I pushed in that I knew had 1,000 members. How many of them were exposed to ads? Right, and you can get that information back, and maybe it's you can get a number, an aggregate number, say 600. Right. So you would know through ADH that of the 1,000 people you pushed in, right, 600 were exposed to ads. So you could assign to that segment or that cohort a 60% probability of being exposed to an ad. Right. That's one of the main functions of ADH is you can't identify the exact user, but you can still get out probabilistic information about if you know who you pushed in and you manage that correctly.
Are we talking about emails specifically? What kind of data segments am I pushing into ADH? Is it
there's
emails?
Yeah, so ADH specifically, it does work across YouTube inventory, right? Works across search, and it does work with DV360, right? That world. From my understanding, the YouTube and the search interfaces, you can push in email. You can push in kind of PII information. Directly into Google via direct match. Google 360 is working on it, but you can use traditional onboarders to push information into DV360 right now. The difference is that in the Google world, right, YouTube is an owned and operated instance where they have identity information, they have login information. DV360 has always worked in cookies, right? And so there needs to be a translation layer. But Google, is correcting for that to be more universal with its identity solution across all of its ad services.
Is it fair for me to say that this is, I've dubbed this GPL, the Google programmatic layer, basically?
Yeah.
Because it works across their entities. So as you mentioned, YouTube, search, and probably Chrome as well. But the ADH falls over on sort of non-Google friendly ecosystems like Firefox and Safari.
Yeah, only when Google's a third party in those systems, right? So if you're on a Google-owned property, right, like YouTube, and you're logged in and you're on Safari and Firefox, they still know who you are, right? They don't, because the authentication event overrides what the browser does.
Yeah. What happens if you're on, let's say I'm on The Guardian using Chrome, can I still be targeted there on that entity?
By Google?
Yeah, by the ADH solution.
Well, in that case, Google is a third party. So not in its traditional, not in the traditional way of using, well, let's say in the future, you won't be able to do it when third party cookies are gone, right? In the current state, still yes, in Chrome, right? But let's just envision the world. Let's just set the ground rules. We're envisioning a world when the third-party cookies aren't.
Okay.
Are no more, right?
Okay. So effectively, ADH is for Google-owned properties mostly.
No, I mean, and DV360, you'll be able to push into that environment. Okay. Now, hold on. Now, if the Guardian, creates a, if there's an authentication event with the Guardian, especially if they log in with Google to log into the Guardian, then yes. That login event would allow Google to still do the targeting what it needed to be on the Guardian because that login event occurred.
Okay, so interesting. So it's a solution, but not a catch-all solution. And obviously you're saying like targeting is sort of deterministic, whereas the attribution and measurement is probabilistic potentially.
Yeah, you can still do you would still be able to execute deterministic targeting, right? Because you've onboarded your user, your IDs, your digital IDs, your users, whatever it is, you onboarded that, right? So you still know who you're targeting, right? But you don't know necessarily who reached, who was reached, and you don't necessarily know, you don't exactly know who converted. You just know a certain number of people within a group were exposed to ads, and a certain number of people within a group converted. Okay,
so outside of that ADH Google related stuff, there's other clean rooms coming out. InfoSum obviously have made a lot of noise about their solution, and there's others as well. Is that sort of the non-Google competitor or option for the rest of the web, or what's so different from them about those?
Yeah, if the world, Google set a precedent, kind of like with creating, its ADH interface. Now that doesn't necessarily work, like on say in Facebook as an example, right?
Yeah.
Or completely across the open web. So there are emerging solutions that that provide the infrastructure to operate clean room type environments. And I want to describe kind of like one of the critical components here is that a clean room allows a principal like a publisher, right, and a principal like an advertiser to directly connect their data together without a third party involved, right? Without a third party like a traditional third party like a DSP or an SSP, right? So the companies that are facilitating the ability to create those connections, right, between the principals, the brand and the publisher, outside of ADH, is that you have LiveRamp in their Safe Haven product, right?
Yeah.
which that was it was originally, I believe it was originally developed as a solution in the European market, between P&G asking Care4, and this is Care4 to create a connective kind of layer for them to be able to share information, right? So and that was a number of years ago now, and I think LiveRamp just maybe officially launched that at RampUp about a month or two ago. But I would say that the safe haven environment with LiveRamp is a clean room like solution. It doesn't operate in the exact same way as ADH, but it allows that connection. In addition, I think another company, you already mentioned them, InfoSum, is a company that is how they operate is a different way than Safe Haven.
Yeah.
But it provides a very similar value proposition, which is allowing the data owners to directly connect data with each other and control the entire connection process.
And that's done in a non-PII way, and in terms of like how they join the data, because it's kind of like done on a schema-based thing, like so it can make
InfoSum specifically.
Yeah.
They provide a whole. They provide their services. They provide a whole different layers of abstraction. Right. So one of them you said is that they have their own schema. Right? So they deploy taxonomy management or cohort management to normalize what the schema is across all the different data owners. In addition, they provide kind of privacy. They model the users, right? So it's not a direct match of one ID to one ID. It's a modeled connection for insight sharing, which is fundamentally probabilistic too, but it's probabilistic at the 99.8% level. I think it is 99.7, right? So it allows for a modeled. The abstraction layer is a model. So it allows for a kind of a very privacy compliant way to share data across it between entities.
Okay, cool. And that's sort of the clean room. Now, moving on to sort of the brands themselves, right? So there is, a lot of people see this as not an opportunity, but you've made it some debated that this is an opportunity for brands, particularly those brands with scaled first-party data. Walmart being an example of a brand with first-party, to sort of build their own walled garden solution, if you will. So I want to talk about that solution where you're almost flipping a brand into a publisher scenario, and just sort of having this sort of like, we can build our own walled garden, because there is this sort of consensus among a lot of people that we're heading to a multi walled garden world, in the sense there's going to be loads of pockets of audience out there. So I just want to touch on that, please.
Yeah, I want to kind of paint a picture, right, or create an analogy, right? You've had, and this is about consider a data owner, right, and not necessarily a brand or a publisher, but to think about a data owner, and that can be a brand or a publisher, right? And consider them to be each of themselves are an island in an archipelago, right? And so they have all their information and all the people that kind of like live on their island and visit their island, right? In the past, you had third-party ad tech, right, who, as long as they could get a tag on a page, was able to build the bridges across the islands, right? And that's the backdrop, right? So, but you could consider each one of those islands to be its own walled garden. Right. So you have obviously the most obvious ones, Facebook, Google, etc. But then you could also argue that brands that are creating authentication events like ExchangeWire. I mean, you ask for people's emails now, right? It's like you're bringing an identity layer into your information in your data, right? Business Insider, here in the Business Insider is like another one that is creating their own mini walled garden. The Wall Street Journal, New York Times, creating these mini walled gardens because they're asking for identity information, kind of on the way in some form or fashion, either through a paywall or an email wall or something like that, right? And so the information, kind of exists in each one of the different islands, whether or not you're a brand owner, right? Because Walmart can have login activity, Expedia can have login activity. All these different companies can own this information, this data. The question then becomes how, without the third-party connectors, how do you build the bridges across them, right? So I think what we're seeing now is that we have to reinvent how you build the bridges across the island.
How do you build those bridges, though? I mean,
Well, I mean,
if I'm a brand right now, Nate, it's a fucking nightmare because, you know, I used to have a currency, right, particularly around display. You know, you'd post view where you could actually measure the efficacy of display. But now
sort of.
we're in a situation.
That was hard still.
That was hard, but it was sort of there. You know what I mean? It was still an option. But now you've got a case of, I put money into Business Insider. I put money into, you know, the ITV walled garden. I put money into Ozone. I put money into Google, Facebook. And I've got no real clarity around attribution in terms of like what's worked and what. You do have some, but you don't have a view of the entire sort of media spend, particularly if you're working off brand metrics, right? It's all right if you're doing click to conversion. You can definitely optimize that. But if you're doing brand, it's a different kettle of fish. So where do you see those bridges? What do you see those bridges looking like, and what is the solution?
Yeah, so I think the most obvious, I think there are other technical solutions. I don't think this is the only technical solution out there. The most obvious is to, as a brand, right, you understand who you pushed in, right, to each of those different walled gardens, right? So you can control, like say if you, especially if you have a lot of PII information, right, you can push that information into each of those providers that you talked about, okay? Now, which creates an opportunity that the PII that you have becomes the bridges across those different entities for you. Right. So you know that you pushed, you pushed 10,000, identities or CRM records or emails into a specific publisher, right? And then you also know that email address did an action or converted because it's off of your CRM system, right? So you are able to connect, kind of across as a brand, you're able to understand the connections across those islands based on a PII connection. Okay, but I think the big but is that what you don't get it for everybody like you do today, right? So with like a cookie ID, or it's like when forget about just forget about like cookie deletion, etc. But just assume that a cookie ID is a persistent identifier. Your sample for in order to do measurement and attribution is pretty much everybody. Right? Because you see the event level conversion event. And when you start working with identity and logins, it's not as scaled as a third party cookie.
Yeah.
Which brings back that the mechanism that have always existed in more traditional media that digital media kind of forgot. It's about sampling, bias correction, et cetera. So you can still do measurement and attribution. It just won't be at the event level. It'll be a sampled level, it'll be at a panel level, and you'll still be able to derive, knowledge and insights and develop models.
Can I drill into that panel-based solution? Because I'm curious about this. This is something I've been thinking about, and often is kind of overlooked by a lot of people in the industry. Measurement is so key to making all of this work. So I'm just curious to know, because Boris mentioned this at ATS Singapore last year. He believed that panel-based measurement was probably going to be how we fix a lot of the measurement issues that we have now. So I just want to dig into that and see, how does that work? Do we need to have like a scaled plugin for Chrome and Safari to kind of do that type of thing? Or is it something a bit more nuanced?
No, I think it's, it could be. I mean, the stuff when you talk about the plugin, that you start thinking about the flocking and the privacy sandbox stuff. But that's just so undeveloped. I don't really want to go there yet, right? But I think just kind of at how that works at one level is, in order to be a member of a panel, a user can sign up for a panel, and a user has to give consent, right? So, when you look at the movement to kind of email walls and kind of paywalls, et cetera, and a user at the time that they're giving their information is an opportunity for a publisher, as an example, to give, kind of a consent handshake, with the user, as long as they declare what it's being used for. right? So if just at the authentication event, as long as the consent management is being operated by the publisher effectively, that user can be raising their hand to contribute to a panel, right? So now consider that maybe only 20% of people log in at all, right? What we're moving from is that we're moving from a world where you had a cookie ID, maybe on 1 billion different people, right? You had 1 billion different cookie IDs, to a world where you might have 100 million, 40 million, or this is, I guess, maybe a global number, authenticated users, right? So your sample size goes way down. It goes from the cookie level to the identity level, and it goes way down, okay? But that also solves a really fundamental problem too, because in the cookie ID, in the device ID world, every user had probably about eight different devices, right?
Yeah.
And so when you're trying to do measurement and attribution in a device world, right, you're trying to do things like test groups and control groups, right? You have a lot of contamination between the test and control groups. Like, you don't know, right? You don't know if the actual person, right, because you only see the digital IDs, that person can exist in the test group and control group. So when you start trying to do measurement and attribution, you're contaminated from the beginning, and it doesn't.
So
really work.
are you saying you would model off those logged in users because you'd
Yes.
have a persistent ID, and you'd have appended data on that, whether it's a male, female, age, group, all the rest of it? You could actually append it and model off the back of that, basically.
And because it solves the identity challenge that we just described, the device ID to the individual challenge, I would also say that the models get much better.
Do you think off the back of that modeling on the authenticated layer, you can still use the measurement panel in the anonymous web as well as a means to kind of measure campaign performance?
Well, I think there's experiments working there, right? I think there's ways to optimize performance. So, for example, if you had your panel, right? This is, and Google made some noise about this last year about testing out models like this. You create your panel where you have an identity level, right? So kind of within that panel, people have basically raised their hand and said, I can be tracked here, right? You know that these users were exposed to ads, these users converted. So you have a nice little environment in order to build a model, okay? Then out of that model, you can append non-PII dimensions. For example, location would be a non-PII dimension. Context would be a non-PII dimension. And so you could model and say, hey, of the converters, right, that we know about in our panel, what else, when I project that model out into a dimension like location or out into a dimension like context, right? What do they do and where do they go? And then those become targeting parameters that are extensions of your model that has a closed feedback loop. Google was doing this too. They were doing experiments to try to see if they could use that panel-based information to control frequency capping when they didn't have cookie IDs. Dimensions like location and context and domain or URL to control.
So who manages that? Who manages that measurement piece then? Is it an industry-wide sort of, we all agree this type of thing and it's IAB related, or is it a ComScore thing, or is it something completely different? Who is the arbiter of whether I saw that ad and whether I bought some shit?
Yeah, well, I think that's up for debate. I think there's a whole bunch of different companies that are going to make a run for that, right? And so, obviously LiveRamp's trying to make a run for that. LiveRamp's trying to play there. You have the I think certain brands can do this in some manner, right? It depends on how they actually kind of execute their measurement and attribution and what information they need. But there are methodologies out there that they could use for optimization. Like a popular one is called intent to treat, which is it's a form of incrementality optimization where you actually don't need ad exposure data, right, in order to run the models, right? So you just ship your data in the way you ship it in, you don't really need to know whether or not somebody was exposed to an ad, right? So there are ways to kind of handle this, but kind of in your example, like who's going to do that? It could be the IAB type of open framework. It could be LiveRamp.
I prefer it to
I
be.
think they're all going to make a run for it.
I would prefer it to be open framework. I think it'd be better for the industry if we have a neutral solution, not controlled by any one company. I think it's dangerous.
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, I hear you there, but I think that's also, I mean, just my opinion there is like, I think that's going to work as well as the publisher consortiums have, right? You know, it's like, I think it's going to basically suffer, you know, some of the same. The better backdrop is a competitive environment. Is that, you know, LiveRamp right now is the company I think is in the lead, right, in order to handle this. But I think as an industry, what we need is competition. So as an industry, what we need is 3 to 4 different companies at a minimum that are doing something like this. And they may have all levels of semi-complete information, right? It's like, you know, LiveRamp's not going to be everywhere, right? And then, and, you know, but there's going to be a, you know, a number of them. And then as an industry, then you basically let the competition between the 3 to 4 or 6 that are making kind of flagging it out.
You see this as a big sort of big growth area potentially the next couple of years as people move into it.
For sure.
So let's we've got 5 minutes left here, Nate. I want to talk a wee bit about some of the stuff you're working on as well, because obviously you're consulting with some brands at the minute, but you're building some stuff as well to kind of remedy this. So just talk about a bit of that because it's quite interesting. Yeah.
So it's really the stuff that I'm building is to. You have to think about a lot what we just described here, right? The underlying data architecture is changing, right? That we're going to have access to in the future, right? So right now we have event level device data, right? And that's what we have. And then we have device graphs, which, you know, solve for some of that. Some of them are accurate, some of them are inaccurate, create some problems, right? But almost all of our optimization systems work at that event level, right? They know that there's a cookie ID or a device ID, and then, and that's how optimization in, you know, kind of marketing technology works at the moment. Because of what we described is that there's that abstraction element, right? Is that you're not necessarily going to see the event level, but you will have some information at the cohort level or some information at, you know, what you push into different places. And so what I'm working on, what I'm building is an optimization system that works at the cohort level, right, or the aggregate level as opposed to the event level, in order to do things like measurement attribution across different channels like, you know, Facebook, Google, you know, email, etc. It's a method. It's a totally different methodology, which is why it needs to be rebuilt now, as opposed to kind of what, you know, powers ad tech at the moment. Just operates in a different way and operates more in the, you know, the way of the panel.
Interesting. And in terms of the brands you're working on, what kind of sort of things are you discussing with them? What type of like problems are they really seeing in the space right now? Like, I mean,
well, the ones I maybe it's just me, but I kind of gravitate to certain brands that, number one, are data owners. Right. And they're, you know, and that's kind of so I might be just, you know, a bit biased there. And two, especially one of the major things I see right now, and this has a lot to do with the current mood of austerity, right, and budget cutbacks, is, you know, brands are looking at how they do measurement and attribution. And they've always done this thing called propensity modeling, right? And that's what kind of those are the types of models that mostly power DSP, Google, etc. But given that, you know, we're in this age of austerity at the moment, I feel that we're ripe, you know, because all the ID redaction stuff that I just described, plus austerity, I think are ripe for incrementality, you know, optimization, which has long been the, you know, the gold standard, right, in panel-based measurement and attribution, and, you know, kind of direct mail. It's, you know, incrementality optimization has always existed in the industry. It just hasn't really existed in digital because we thought we had something better. Right? And I think you could argue that that was never really true.
Give us an example. Give us an example of incrementality, please, because
incrementality versus propensity.
Yeah.
I remember that 5 years ago in New York, I did an exchange wire event, you know, about incrementality optimization, right, in New York. And the fundamental difference is that most models work off propensity, so that means that they end up targeting users that we're going to convert anyway.
Like like retargeting. Retargeting is a good example of propensity. Yeah.
Right. Retargeting works in some elements, but it probably doesn't work as well as we think it does as we measure it by a propensity model.
Right. Okay.
So, right, like retargeting. So the difference is, do you convert, does your model go after the types of ad impressions and the type of users that would have converted anyway, because that's what feeds the model, or do you compare it to a relative point? And, in an incrementality model, you compare it to a point of relativity, which is a baseline. So you have a group of users that are, that are a control group or a baseline that you say, okay, these users were not exposed to ads, right? And they still converted. And you know that the conversion rate for these users was X, right? And then you look at the treatment group and you say, okay, the conversion rates to these users is either up or down, right? Based on the fact that we treated them with ads. And that's, and that's the difference between propensity model and incrementality optimization, is that incrementality creates room. It applies the scientific method to create a control group to say, what would have, I want to isolate the treatment effect, which is the ad exposure, and to see whether or not it actually created a positive or negative impact. And what propensity modeling does not consider the relative control group.
So you think we have an opportunity to rebuild that?
Yeah, I think that solves a lot. I mean, think about how people are upset, at the the current state of ad tech. A lot of times because they get chased around with remarketing ads that annoy them.
They're shit.
Right. And so, but you bring an incrementality measurement to that, incrementality measurement and optimization, to that, understanding, the model stops chasing those users around because it understands it and annoys them. They don't convert.
Okay.
But I think it fixes a lot of problems. It fixes identity issues. It fixes, kind of a synergy between email marketing and paid advertising. There's I mean, we don't have to go into it right now, but I think it fixes a lot of the issues that we see in ad tech. I really just think the measurement's been wrong. The measurement optimization attribution has been wrong for a long time.
All right, Nate, I think you're breaking up there. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah. On that note, I think we're going to have to do a long post on Exchange Wire, because that propensity versus incrementality thing is fascinating and probably worthy of another webcast. We'll probably come back to you and do another one in a couple of months for sure. But I want to thank you for taking your time to talk to me today. I know you're a busy man. You're obviously helping brands figure out this shit, and obviously you're working in your fish restaurant in Massachusetts. Yeah. Do you still have that?
Yeah, clams. But
yeah, my clams. Is it just clams, or is it other stuff as well?
But it's more known for shellfish. Yeah, clams and lobsters.
I definitely want to try. You got to try Nate's clam shop out when you get up to Boston. I'm going to make it up there one day. But thanks, mate. I really appreciate your time, and we'll talk soon.
All right, Kieran. Thank you, man. Take care.
All right.